Welcome to another video. Today we're going to be covering another of the Hermetic principles. I'll be reading from the Kybalion. This is the Hermetic principle of polarity. So far we've covered the all through two videos that I did titled the all and then the all in all. And then we did correspondence, or the idea of as above, so below. And then the most recent video we did was vibration, and that was a very interesting chapter. Today we'll be covering polarity, so let's get right to it. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. The Kybalion. The great fourth Hermetic principle, the principle of polarity, embodies the truth that all manifested things have two sides, two aspects, two poles, a pair of opposites, with manifold degrees between the two extremes. The old paradoxes which have ever perplexed the mind of men are explained by an understanding of this principle. Man has always recognized something akin to this principle, and has endeavored to express it by such sayings, maxims, and aphorisms as the following. Everything is and isn't at the same time. All truths are but half-truths. Every truth is half false. There are two sides to everything. There is a reverse side to every shield, etc., etc. The Hermetic teachings are to the effect that the difference between things seemingly diametrically opposed to each other is merely a matter of degree. It teaches that the pairs of opposites may be reconciled, and that thesis and antithesis are identical in nature, but different in degree, and that the universal reconciliation of opposites is effected by the recognition of this principle of polarity. The teachers claim that illustrations of this principle may be had on every hand, and from an examination into the real nature of anything, they begin by showing that spirit and matter are but the two poles of the same thing, the intermediate planes being merely degrees of vibration. They show that the all and the many are the same, the difference being merely a matter of degree of mental manifestation. Thus, the law and laws are the two opposite poles of one thing. Likewise, principle and principles, infinite minds and finite mind. Then, passing on to the physical plane, they illustrate the principle by showing that heat and cold are identical in nature, the differences being merely a matter of degrees. The thermometer shows many degrees of temperature, the lowest pole being called cold, the highest heat. Between these two poles are many degrees of heat or cold. Call them either, and you are equally correct. The higher of 2 degrees is always warmer, while the lower is always colder. There is no absolute standard. All is a matter of degree. There is no place on the thermometer where heat ceases and cold begins. It is all a matter of higher or lower vibration. The very terms high and low, which we are compelled to use, are but poles of the same thing. The terms are relative. So with east and west, travel around the world in an eastward direction, and you reach a point which is called west at your starting point, and you return from that westward point. Travel far enough north, and you will find yourself traveling south, or vice versa. Light and darkness are poles of the same thing, with many degrees between them. The musical scale is the same. Starting with C, you move upward until you reach another C, and so on, the differences between the two ends of the board being the same, with many degrees between the two extremes. The scale of color is the same, higher and lower vibrations being the only difference between high violet and low red. Large and small are relative, so are noise and quiet. Hard and soft follow the same rule. Likewise, sharp and dull. Positive and negative are two poles of the same thing, with countless degrees between them. Good and bad are not absolute. We call one end of the scale good, the other bad, or one end good and the other evil, according to the use of the terms. A thing is less good than the thing higher in the scale, but that less good thing in turn is more good than the thing next below it, and so on, the more or less being regulated by the position on the scale. I want to pause here and really just unpack everything that we read so far here about polarity, because light vibration, when you're thinking about polarity in this level, it really affords you the opportunity to remove your judgment from whatever thing you are looking at. And I love when it goes to describe how good and bad are not absolute, and how a certain thing that's just a degree or just resonating slightly below a certain other thing could be thought of as good, while the other thing is thought of as bad. And we have all of these ideologies that may work for a moment until they don't. And we see that represented in our society in terms of things like the Me Too movement and people going back years for different things that, I mean, yeah, some of them were inappropriate at any time, but at the time may have been something that was deemed okay, but now it no longer is. So it really becomes a where are we on the scale? What have we publicly declared to be good or bad, and how will we adjust our judicial standards based on our coming awareness? And then the question is, where is this awareness coming from? What's really happening here? And can anyone really be blamed for their lack of knowledge? And so it is on the mental plane. Love and hate are generally regarded as being things diametrically opposed to each other, entirely different, unreconcilable. But we apply the principle of polarity. We find that there is no such thing as absolute love or absolute hate as distinguished from each other. The two are merely terms applied to the two poles of the same thing. Beginning at any point of the scale, we find more love or less hate as we ascend the scale, and more hate or less love as we descend. This being true no matter from what point, high or low, we may start. There are degrees of love and hate, and there is a middle point where like and dislike become so faint that it is difficult to distinguish between them. Courage and fear come under the same rule. The pairs of opposites exist everywhere. Where you find one thing, you find its opposite, the two poles. Now, I want to pause here, and I want to remind you, or if you haven't seen that video on vibration, go back and watch it, because in that video, the Kybalion talks about how if you are able to master the fact that everything moves and vibrates, you can become the master of your emotions. And now here, talking about polarity, we have love and hate being put to the spotlight, as well as courage and fear. And it's made it's made known to you that the pair of opposites exist everywhere. Now, I read a book a while back by what's his name? Is it Viktor Frankl, called Power versus Force. I can't remember who the exact author is, but I'll do a breakdown of it, because if I remember correctly, in that book there was a different charts that gave all of the different opposites for each emotion. And the reason that that's important is because if you can start to recognize your emotions and put a word to your emotions, for one, that's a stage of healing, being able to recognize your emotion for what it is and then adjust accordingly. Now, applying the principles of polarity, or applying these universal principles to a thing, if you understand that that emotion is just a vibration, it's just a frequency that you're now tuned to. And if you can recognize what the opposite of that frequency is, so let's say you're in a position where you feel fear. Okay, you recognize that fear is just a lower vibration on the scale that includes courage. You raise that frequency. All right, now you go from a position of fearful to courage. And whatever tool you use, it'll be different for everybody. What triggers you use to pull yourself up into that higher vibration. But if the opposite exists for every emotion that we have, this is really about training ourselves to, one, identify our emotions, and then training ourselves to, two, understand what we can use to trigger the higher of the vibration that we want to experience. Let's continue. And it is this fact that enables the Hermeticist to transmute one mental state into another along the lines of polarization. Things belonging to different classes cannot be transmuted into each other, but things of the same class may be changed. That is, may have their polarity changed. Thus, love never becomes east or west or red or violet, but it may, and often does, turn into hate. And likewise, hate may be transformed into love by changing its polarity. Courage may be transmuted into fear in the reverse. Hard things may be rendered soft. Dull things become sharp. Hot things become cold, and so on. The transmutation the transmutation always being between things of a same kind of different degrees. Take the case of a fearful man. By raising his mental vibrations along the line of fear courage, he can be filled with the highest degree of courage and fearlessness. And likewise, the slothful man may change himself into an active, energetic individual simply by polarizing along the lines of the desired quality. I want to pause again because I've seen how I've been able to use this in my life, in my personal life, to heal and grow in terms of things like when I quit smoking cigarettes, and just the process that I went through to raise my vibration from a it really was a fear state. I was scared of who I would be without them, to really courage. And then it was a lot that went into that, and I'll talk about that in a separate video as well. But when the book says here that you can use this to truly change your states, I'm telling you from experience, you absolutely can. But this is an inside job. I can tell you the things that I've done personally, and I can read this to you all day. You can go back and watch this video again and get more from it. Pick up the book, read with me, and get more from it. And but unless you actually start applying these things to see how real it is to you, every one of us is a master. You wouldn't be alive today if you hadn't mastered the art of creating your reality. And you may look around you and say, but I don't feel like I've mastered anything. But you are exactly the sum of all of your thoughts. And now you're aware of that. So, yes, you are a master. It's just, how are you creating? Understanding how these universal principles work, and now applying how you've been operating to them, and seeing, okay, this is polarity. So when I was in this fearful situation, this is what I did to tune myself out of it, to tune it up, or to get to apply, to occupy a different mental state. Let's continue. The student who is familiar with the process by which the various schools of mental science, etc., produce changes in the mental states of those following their teachings may not readily understand the principle underlying many of these changes. When, however, the principle of polarity is once grasped, and it is seen that the mental changes are occasioned by a change of polarity, a sliding along the same scale, the matter is more readily understood. The change is not in the nature of transmutation of one thing into another thing entirely different, but it is merely a change of degree in the same things, a vastly important difference. For instance, borrowing an analogy from the physical plane, it is impossible to change heat into sharpness, loudness, highness, etc., but he may readily be transmuted into cold simply by lowering the vibrations. In the same way, hate and love are mutually transmutable, so are fear and courage, but fear cannot be transformed into love, nor can courage be transmuted into hate. The mental states belong to innumerable classes, each class of which has its opposite poles along which transmutation is possible. So, just pausing here, this is why it's absolutely important that we recognize our emotions. It's absolutely important that we recognize the opposite of the emotion that is possible. If we can think of the opposite of whatever emotion that we're feeling, especially if it's a negative emotion that we no longer want to experience, if you know what the opposite is, then the challenge just becomes, okay, how can you tune your mental state from being aware of that lower vibration to the awareness of the higher vibration? Because the higher vibration is always there. You're never separate from it. That's the thing when it comes to being within the mind of the all. you realize that nothing is ever apart from you, nothing is ever outside of you. So all you have to do is recognize whatever emotion it is that you're in experiencing, whatever frequency, whatever vibration it is, and what is its opposite. Its opposite is how you can escape that lower state, that creating from that lower vibration. The student will readily recognize that in the mental states, as well as the phenomena of the physical plane, the two poles may be classified as positive and negative, respectively. Thus, love is positive to hate, courage to fear, activity to non activity, etc., etc. And it will also be noticed that even to those unfamiliar with the principle of vibration, the positive pole seems to be of a higher degree than the negative, and readily dominates it. The tendency of nature is in the direction of the dominant activity of the positive pole. In addition to the changing of the poles of one's own mental states by the operation of the art of polarization, the phenomena of mental influence in its manifold phases shows us that the principle may be extended so as to embrace the phenomena of the influence of one mind over that of another, of which so much has been written and taught of late years. When it is understood that mental induction is possible, that is, that mental states may be produced by induction from others, then we can readily see how a certain rate of vibration or polarization of a certain mental state may be communicated to another person, and its polarity in that class of mental states thus changed. It is along this principle that the results of many of the mental treatments are obtained. For instance, a person is blue, melancholy, and full of fear. A mental scientist, bringing his own mind up to the desired vibration by his trained will, and thus obtaining the desired polarization in his own case, then produces a similar mental state in the other by induction. The result being that the vibrations are raised and the person polarizes toward the positive end of the scale instead of toward the negative, and his fear and other negative emotions are transmuted to courage and similar positive mental states. A little study will show you that these mental changes are nearly all along the line of polarization, the change being one of degree rather than in kind. I want to pause there and unpack what they just said. Mental induction, or the idea that someone resonating at a certain frequency can pull another person out of a certain mental state, is exactly what I talk about so much in my videos when I talk about thinking for someone else. When we talk about this law of attraction and manifesting, and you operate from the position that we all exist within the mind of God, now you start thinking about what it is that your mental power can do, what types of thought forms that you can create during the day if you're not letting your mind run wild, and if you are aware of everything going on around you. You can take a drive and heal the world just by looking at different things and seeing them in your mind differently from how you see it, how you see the atoms vibrating around you. That's called walking by faith, and understanding that because you thought it, that thought has to represent itself. You don't need to know the characters in play. You don't need to know any of that. All you know is that you're using your thought power towards a higher good. And that good will be returned to you in kind. I promise you, your life will change. If you can't think for yourself, if you can't think good about yourself because of the situations that you're going on, can you think good about someone else? When you're at a red light and you see that person with the sign, and you know you don't have any cash to give them, can you, in your mind's eye, see you handing them an entire grip of $100 bills? Can you see that in your mind? Or is that difficult for you? Can you see that person, instead of holding a sign, maybe selling some bottles of water? Or can you see that person on the other side of the road just closing up their shop? When I tell you, this is how we truly change this world, by not seeing things as they are and allowing them to remain in that lower state, but by raising our vibration so much so that when you walk into a room, people can't help but feel your aura. Have you ever seen a confident individual walk in and they're positive, and then maybe what was going on before them in that room was a bunch of negative talk, and just by their demeanor, they change the whole situation around. They don't even have to say anything, and people start thinking there is hope. That's what this mental induction is. It happens all around us. People are charismatic, have that aura. You go to some of those events, those political rallies. Look at Trump. You don't think that that's mental induction? You don't think that those people leave there feeling some type of way, feeling like he's something, not knowing that the power inside of him is the same power inside of them? When I say you can change this world just by taking a drive around the block and changing things in your mind, it ain't hard. It ain't a lot you got to do. Just train your mind not to run wild. I'm going to go ahead and finish this chapter. A knowledge of the existence of this great Hermetic principle will enable the student to better understand his own mental states and those of other people. He will see that these states are all matters of degree, and seeing thus, he will be able to raise or lower the vibration at will, to change his mental poles and thus be master of his mental states, instead of being their servant and slave. And by his knowledge, he will be able to aid his fellows intelligently, and by the appropriate methods, change the polarity when the same is desired. We advise all students to familiarize themselves with this principle of polarity, for a correct understanding of the same will throw light on many difficult subjects. The things that I talk about on this channel are going to be based on all of these Hermetic principles. I'm going to tie them all together so that when you come to my channel and you encounter the spark, you know how to operate, how to move throughout this world. You know how to look at any situation and not see it as something that's greater than you, not see it as something that you can't overcome. There is power inside of you. There is life inside of you. We're not supposed to be just victims of the law. We're supposed to understand the law and use higher laws against the lower so that we can pull ourselves out of any situation. Now, when you start changing your life, you don't just think that you're suddenly better than everybody just because someone's in a mental state that may be of a lower vibration than you are. That's not cool. You see where people are, you see where they're trying to be, and you put them there in your mind. Put them there in your mind. When somebody tells you what their dream is, before they walk away from that conversation, you should already see them living it. When someone tells me what they want to do, I tell them instantly, I see you doing it. If that's what you want, and all it takes is for me to create the thought form, I don't have any excess importance towards what your dream is. That's the key to this. When you're trying to create your own reality, you're fighting forces like excess importance. You're fighting things like trying to stay balanced, not trying to attribute anything extra so that you create a barrier between that thing entering into your physical reality. And we'll talk about excess importance in detail. But when it comes to somebody else, their situation, there is no excess importance when it comes to thinking for somebody else. So it's like a cheat code. You're just giving them free energy. And if you realize that we're all one, then you understand the beauty of what it is that I'm telling you. Show a little bit of love, and I guarantee it'll come back to you. So even if you're service to self, there's nothing that prevents you from just thinking that someone else has what they want. You can think that you have something better if that's what you need, but you'll quickly find that you don't. That there's more joy that comes from simply thinking for someone, even than thinking for yourself. I love you. I want to see the fullest expression of you. This is the spark.